Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It's a full room, which I didn't expect after lunch, so appreciate you all coming back. As I said, my name is Nadia Starr. I look after operations at SAQA, in particular NQF operations, because really that is what the South African Qualification Authority is mandated to do. I'd like to also just add that, we've tried to give a very high, quick overview of, certain aspects. And if there are conversations and tangents that the audience want us to go on, we're happy to do that. But these are just, some initial discussion points. Thank you. All right, so the context that we're talking about, I think, really is a context that we share on the African continent, but it's one of systemic and structural inequality, very high and pervasive unemployment, and of course, the resultant poverty that comes from these sorts of structural contexts. Our population is about 59, 60 million in South Africa. And, in terms of this number, we find that we have, again, like the African continent, a high percentage of young people in South Africa. And of course, both youth and those who, like me, are just outside of that, are expected to be lifelong learners in terms of the South African NQF. Our life expectancy is 62 years, so the journey of lifelong learning is really a long one, and one that the NQF, the South African National Qualifications Framework, needs to cater for at all aspects in one's life journey. As I said, poverty is a systemic problem, and in South Africa we have at least 55% living below the poverty line, and so one needs to think about this context when one is delivering education, and particularly in terms of the commodification of education, and particularly higher education. Our unemployment, depending on where you look, ranges between 35 and 42% of the 60 million. It's a huge number of people who essentially need the tools to access either the labor market or in order to create viable self-employment for themselves. And self-employment is something that South Africa has not quite cracked in the way that other African countries have done. Our needs, not in employment, education and training, young people sit at about 3.6 million. This is 35% of our young people who are not in any kind of education or employment endeavors. And so these are really problematic cohorts that the NQF in particular need to accommodate. So this is an overly complex slide, but really what we're trying to show is the evolution of the NQF. And Colleen is smiling because she knows she's seen this and probably developed most of it in her previous life. We just added a year or two onto it, Colleen. But really what we're trying to show is this broad evolution of the South African NQF, and I'll take you through some of the important milestones, so you don't have to read any of this too much. But really, our NQF is a democratic instrument. And so at the dawn of democracy in South Africa in 1994, it was around that time that the National Qualifications Framework was conceived. And this is an important, foundation, because our NQF is a social instrument for change. It is an instrument for transformation. It is an instrument that is supposed to give access, redress, to the previously disadvantaged, and really to all South Africans. And so the NQF is, as we say, a democratic instrument. In 1995, just a year into democracy, the SAQA Act was promulgated, which established SAQA in 1996, but also in 1998, the 8-level National Qualifications Framework. So our history starts with an 8-level NQF, and later on, we have moved to a 10-level NQF, and there's some challenges in even that transition, which either myself or Yapi will talk to in a little while. But essentially from 1998, we've had a national qualifications framework in South Africa, a learning outcomes-based framework, and it's been one that, at the time catered for 3 bands: our general education, our further and vocational education, and our higher education. What then happened from that point of the NQF establishment was a long period of review. We've had study teams, national commissions reviewing our NQF, and the outputs of those really were the joint policy statement in 2007 by the then Department of Labour, the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Education. But ultimately, those reviews and statements resulted in 2008 in the NQF Act. And this is an important distinction. We started with the SAQA Act, which established, SAQA in order to establish and implement the NQF. But through the review process, we realized the NQF itself is the primary instrument. And the institutional arrangements, who we put in place to implement these things shouldn't be foregrounded. So we foregrounded our NQF in its own act. And that act provides for a 10-level NQF. And we'll talk to what the NQF looks like in a minute. But it also changed some of the institutional arrangements in our landscape. It created, at the bottom, what you don't see are the Department of Higher Education and Training logo and the quality councils. So in 2009, we had through presidential proclamation, the merger of some parts of our old Department of Education and our Department of Labour into the Department of Higher Education and Training. The DHET, as we call them, looks after the post-school and education training system. So anything for adults or youth that have left basic schooling. We then also have a Department of Education that still looks after our basic schooling. But the DHET is and the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation is our executive authority in terms of the NQF family. The 2008 NQF Act also established quality councils. Now, this is another important distinction. In South Africa, at the first establishment of our NQF, SAQA itself held quality assurance functions, and we developed qualifications and standards for our qualifications framework. With the move to the NQF Act, the NQF Act actually creates quality councils for our 3 sub-frameworks, and these quality councils are quality assurance agencies with the powers to recommend qualifications to SAQA. So SAQA is no longer both the developer and the adjudicator of qualifications. The other thing that the NQF Act introduced was the incorporation of professional bodies into our NQF. We've realized that the professional pathway, the designations that allow license to practice and access into employment is very closely linked. Can I touch something? Is very closely linked to our career, to our learning pathways. And so in South Africa, we've incorporated professional bodies and designations into the NQF. And Mr. Nell will talk to that in his presentation. We have, since the 2008 NQF Act, had a period of some evaluations, and on the back of the evaluations, there have been further amendments that have been proposed, and in fact, promulgated. So we have a new NQF Act, 2019. It has not, however, been signed off by our president. So we're sitting in a bit of limbo with a new act that is on the table, providing us with additional mandates, specifically mandates for verification of national qualifications, and the continued mandate to authenticate foreign qualifications, but it also very crucially brings in the powers to report misrepresented qualifications. And I think this is something that on the African continent we need to keep talking about. The numbers of certificates and achievements that are not validly awarded. And so our NQF Act, or our amended Act, proposes the reporting of misrepresented and fraudulent qualifications. We have in 2021 an additional proposal to amend our NQF Act. So you'll see that our legislative framework is constantly being enhanced and improved, although these two amendments have not, as I said, yet been signed off for enactment by the president. But the last amendments were really about definitions, looking at the definitions and trying to find commonality and a common understanding in terms of definitions. And this is particularly crucial because we have 3 sub-frameworks on our NQF. And to have higher education saying and thinking the same things as basic education and vocational education is a challenge. And so the definitions have become for us quite important in that it needs to accommodate the nuances and the differences in the sub-frameworks, but it also crucially must provide standardization so that we as an NQF can say to other countries, when we talk about this thing, it's the same as your thing. And so it's a fine balance in a differentiated sub-framework that contributes to a national integrated NQF. So this is the South African NQF. You'll see in blue, level 1, 2, 3, 4 in blue on the left-hand side is our basic schooling. At NQF 4, that's where our national school leaving certificate is awarded by the Quality Council responsible for basic schooling, Umalusi. And that national certificate is our national senior certificate, our matric, our school leaving certificate. Above that, our traditional route from basic schooling into higher education from levels 5 to 10. And I think you'll see the sort of qualification types there are quite similar and uniform in terms of higher education on the continent and internationally. And the higher education sub-framework is quality assured by the Council for Higher Education. The third sub-framework is the newer sub-framework, and really what the 2008 NQF Act did was to demarcate these sub-frameworks very clearly as separate but integrated sub-frameworks. And it also then at that time established the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, and the QSTO is the Quality Council for all of our occupational and trade qualifications. Their sub-framework has only been determined up to level 8 by the minister, and I think the RP can talk to it, but there's been some contestation about, vocational qualifications at master's and doctorate level, with I think the QCTO wanting to start to move into that space in certain areas. But for now, our vocational qualifications are capped at level 8. So the policy levels in the NQF environment, as I said, we've got quality councils, 3 quality councils, Umalusi, CHE, and the QSTO, and they work within their respective sub-frameworks. They determine policy and quality assurance processes for their sub-frameworks within the broader umbrella of the NQF policies. SAQA, of course, manages, subject to the ministerial policy and guidelines, the national policies for qualification development, for assessment, for CAT, for RPL specifically. And of course for recognition of professional bodies, and we do so under the broad umbrella of the ministry, which sets the overall guidelines and demarcates the NQF. The key lessons that we've learned. I mean, we could have filled a book, I think, of key lessons, but just some things that we thought might be relevant. Firstly, NQFs need to take context into account. I mean, I think I'm probably speaking to the converted here, but it cannot be that we take policy instruments, transplant them, and expect them to grow in the same way that they would in native soil. So contexts are incredibly important. NQFs are contested and negotiated. The South African NQF is a social construct. It's a relational construct. It is something that is alive and develops in the hearts and minds of people. And it's through our engagements and through our agreements and our shared understanding that the thing grows. But because of that, it is contested, it is negotiated, and it is an ongoing relationship and negotiation, particularly to ensure that the sub-frameworks remain coherent and remain able to articulate and talk to one another. We're struggling in the South African NQF with a balance between institutional autonomy, and I heard a question about, how does one retain autonomy? But the balance between the institutional autonomy and the national imperative, because very often the institutional autonomy is used to block redress, access, equity. And so in South Africa, we're trying to find ways to respect autonomy whilst also ensuring that, the social justice principles are always embedded in our education system. And we have some, examples, particularly in RPL, where, there are misinterpretations, that are cloaked in institutional autonomy to block certain areas. I think I've said instruments and approaches are transferable across countries, but, we must remember that these things are culturally and socially embedded. And so when one is looking at, taking on another policy or system, it really does need to understand the context in which it is coming, the institutions that will be implementing, the quality assurance models and relationships that will create the parameters for the implementation. And of course, we've also seen that in terms of implementing a qualifications framework, the principles of inclusiveness, access, progression, mobility are crucial in justifying certainly the South African NQF because of our very disparate and unequal past. And then, of course, we know that the implementation of an NQF is a multi-year process. And, if you look at the trajectory of the South African NQF, a multi-decade process, a constant evolution, a constant revitalization to make sure that it remains current and valid. Just quickly to look at what is in the pipeline for our sort of next year or two. There are, I think, 3 big areas that SAQA is looking at the moment. Firstly, small units of learning, micro-credentials, whatever you want to call it. We cannot, avoid the conversation. In South Africa, we're of the opinion that we've always had micro-credentials. We've got part qualifications, we've got parts of qualifications that are registered on the NQF. And these are small units of learning. They're not digitally enabled, perhaps. And so if one thinks about micro-credentials as digital certifications, there might be some ways for us to move. And so what we're doing at the moment is really trying to conceptualize a South African position in relation to the continental and global position that will position us in terms of the micro-credential conversation. And it might be, in fact, that we say, small units of learning are here, and this is what it will look like in South Africa with or without the digital enablement, I guess. But it's certainly something that we are working on. We're also looking, after having learned some lessons, I think, since 2009 with professional bodies, we're looking at differentiating our professional body policy regime. At the moment, in South Africa, all professional bodies who want to, operate as a professional body and award a designation would have to be registered with SAQA in order to register their designations on the NQF. But we find that we have 2 categories of professional body. The one is a statutory body that is established by law and is required to provide license to practice doctors, teachers, engineers, professionals in the safety space. And the other are voluntary organizations that operate slightly differently and don't have legislated mandates. And so having worked with these entities as a one-size-fits-all category, we're starting to realize that we might need to differentiate how we deal with statutory versus non-statutory professional bodies. And that is a process that we are busy researching and consulting on at the moment. The last process that we're kind of dealing with at the moment is our level descriptor review. And we've, very briefly, I heard this morning some conversations about how do you level and rate qualifications, etc. Our level descriptors, I think, internationally, we use level descriptors really to describe what each level looks like and the complexity of the cognitive requirements. In South Africa, we've got 10 levels, and so we've got a level descriptor for each level, but we have a quite complicated system where each of the 10 levels have 10 categories. And, internationally, we've seen sometimes 3 categories. World reference levels, I think, has 11, but they're clustered. So really what South Africa is doing at the moment is saying, these level descriptors, do they need to be updated? Do they need to be rationalized? Do they need to be, reviewed for currency? At the moment, they're 10 years old, and we know COVID, technology, etc., has really changed our world. And so the level descriptors have to be reviewed. Through all of this, SACWA is going through quite a big automation project. We've secured funds through our ministry and through our own revenue sources to automate just about everything that SACWA is doing, from qualifications development and registration, all the way through to checking and verifying your statement of results. Now we have, of course, automated systems, and Tola will talk to you about our NQF MIS that holds our learner achievement. But it's about how does one use that data, strategically, and how does one open access to that data that this automation project, I think, will really help us with. My last slide, I was thinking about it as a pipeline and a pipe dream, but these are not necessarily pipe dreams. What we are looking at in, the near future, although it might not be in the next year or two, is 100% complete record of learning. And when I say 100%, we have people in this country who studied before democracy. We don't necessarily have their records sitting in our NQF MIS, and this is a problem for us. And so we are on quite a big drive to collect information that sometimes sits in boxes in provinces, having come from a system, where provinces, for instance, looked after education. And so there's a very big drive, but it requires resources and money to collect all of this information, to secure it in our NQF MIS. And Tola will tell you, what the stats are in terms of what we have, but we want more. Data is incredibly important, and for citizens who want to be lifelong learners, we need to have a more complete record than we currently do. We're also looking at interoperability. And I've said, for example, the PSET Cloud, there are other initiatives that we're engaging with. But ultimately, what SACWA is looking at is how do we create integrations with other databases, with other agencies that might need the information, so that there isn't a reliance always on, picking up the phone, sending an email. How do we create seamless engagements, for instance, with banks? When we apply for a home loan or a car loan or whatever it is, the bank is doing an affordability check on you. And in many cases, they're not giving you that credit rating because they're trying to find out if you're a professional, if you're qualified. And so these sorts of interoperable functions where organizations can reach in and look at our data, we feel will be an important avenue for citizens to really use their data in more valuable ways. And of course, we are constantly striving for enhanced harmonization for African graduate mobility. To this end, we've been engaging quite robustly with our Department of Higher Education, DIRCO, and the International Relations departments to ensure that we have the right MOUs in place with with specific countries where we need mobility, because they are either national projects or we're seeing significant movement between countries. And so this is going to be an ongoing initiative for us. And I'm very pleased that I've already started to meet some really good contacts on the continent and in the region, because ultimately we are going to try and create systems to particularly implement the Addis Convention and ensure graduate mobility. And I think that's it from me. I've put up my business card, and the QR code there will take you straight to my details. If you want to get hold of me at any stage, please do. Thank you. Questions and then the next one.
Later, I'll take the questions. Yeah. You want the question? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nadia. That was a very interesting presentation. It's almost like a journey of frustrations but hope, which is very interesting. I always think about, when we talk about like learning pathways, these journeys are never linear. They're full of, and it's a long winding road, as you can see, at least in the South African experience. And we are also noticing it in our own experiences in the other countries. it's never a straightforward, linear process. Lots of obstacles, lots of frustration, but lots of opportunities that come by. And I also always, thanks Nadia for raising this. What is the overall goal? What is underlying in all this? The issue that Nadia talks about, democracy, social justice, those things become really important at a higher level of why we are actually doing what we are doing. And in this case, in the South African, in South African sense. And, the whole area of, Nadia uses the word relational agency, the whole area of, and we've talked about it in the last few days, so many agencies are involved in the development, in the building blocks, in the strengthening of the NQF. It's a whole load of different agencies and people coming together, which itself is not an easy task. I think I remember somebody talking about that. How do you get people to work together? So I think in many ways, our own experience has been that it's not easy, but there is a possibility of doing so. So there are certain places that are, we have been successful, certain places we have failed, and we have to try again. So, so this was an overview of the NQF. I'd like to invite. Oh, I see. Nadia, you would like to have questions come through? How? Okay. We can please, like how we always do, please keep your questions and your comments handy, and we can look at those questions a little later. We'll take through that. Can I ask? I think it's Yapi. It's your turn. If you can come over. Here you are.
Thank you. Hello, colleagues. I attended also, or I did a presentation also earlier this week, and I must say that I feel like a preacher with a mic in front of me. Let's do a presentation. Okay, while they're loading in the presentation, is that I think that what Nadia said is that when you look at the NQF development, it's about consultation. It's not about an institution or a department. And what you need to take into consideration is the end point, and that's the learner. So what's the learner? What will be the benefit for the learner? So it's not to say that, okay, I'm from CHE and I want to push the agenda from CHE. It's what will the learner get out of that at the end of the day? Still loading.
Erica, can you put on the next presentation?
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. And the other point also is that we can talk quite a lot in a long time about. Okay. Still learning also. That jumped too quick. If you look at the system here, is that Nadia indicated that it's about the NQF, the three sub-frameworks, the Council on Higher Education, or CHE, QCTO, Quality Council for Trades and Occupation, and Umalusi for schools. I also joke normally is that when you develop an NQF, you develop a new language also. And that is when we start using QCTO and CHE. Nadia keeps on asking me, please explain that, because other people don't always know what I'm talking about. If you look at this is a snapshot of the process. So when you look at the public providers, those are our public institutions, universities. They are established through an Act of Parliament, Higher Education Act, establishing them and recognized by the Minister of Higher Education and Training, or Higher Education, Science and Innovation. And you can see the registration at the bottom here, but that's not for the public institutions. Those are private institutions that want to offer qualifications in the higher education sub-framework. What they need to do is that they need to be registered with the Department of Higher Education and Training. As soon as they are registered, they need to submit their program to CHE for accreditation. And when the CHE approved or accredited the program, it will be recommended to SAQA for registration on the NQF. Only afterwards, they can actually offer them the qualification. If you look then also from a private provider on the school side, is that if it's a public institution, again, by the Schools Act, they don't need to be accredited or registered. They are established by an act. But if it's a private school, they still need to be registered with the Department of Basic Education, and they need to be accredited by Umalusi in the schools. For QCTO part is that when they develop qualifications, they establish what they call a community of expert practitioners, or what they say a qualifications development committee. What they do then is that they look at industry, looking at the occupation, looking at what is required for that specific occupation as a qualification. And then they register or recommend to SAQA for registration. And afterwards, your skills development providers need to be accredited by the QCTO to offer that qualification. From QCTO point of view also, what they do is that in all their occupational qualifications, they do have an external integrated summative assessment, or SAQISH, ASA. They do have an ASA. So all qualifications, they need to do a summative assessment before they can actually obtain the qualification. So what I indicated is that all three quality councils need to recommend qualifications to SAQA for registration. And what we do at SAQA is that we also evaluate the qualifications, too fast again, according to specific criteria. And I heard Andrea Bateman also mention that there are criteria for qualification. So what we look at, title, field, and subfield as the first thing. And Nadia indicated also that the qualification types developed by each quality council, but they will say that we do have qualification types per level in the qualification. So in evaluation, for example, if you look at a higher certificate, NQF level 5, there's a minimum credit for that qualification of 120. So you can see already field level credit, and then the rationale and purpose. So the purpose, what will the learner be able to do after completing this qualification? So that's the question, the main question. The rationale is that why should the learner do this? What's the reason why this qualification is there? And if it's not really, there's no need for that. And I think that, again, there were some inputs to say that there's a rationale for this qualification. You cannot just develop a qualification for the sake of development and the learner can do nothing with that qualification. Then you look at RPL, entry requirements, also extremely important. As Nadia indicated, some past discrimination, many people did not attend school or leave school very early. But what they did is that they learned at the workplace. And normally what I do is that I will give an example to say that one of my previous bosses drove a very nice big Mercedes, taking that for a service to a garage. And when they service the car, it's not the mechanic or the technician that serviced the car. What they call is a repair shop assistant. He will actually, or she will actually do the service. And then what the mechanic will do is just tick, yes, this was done, and you pay the salary for the mechanic and not for the repair shop assistant. So that repair shop assistant got all the knowledge, all the practical experience, no qualification. So that's part of the RPL that they can do there. Entry requirements also that what will the learner bring to the qualification to allow that learner to complete the qualification successfully. Then you can see rules of combination. So what are the modules that they will do as part of the qualification, the exit level outcomes and associated assessment criteria. And I will touch also on the level descriptors. So if, for example, they develop a qualification at level 6, a diploma, is that what will a learner do? What kind or what type of, what is the depth of the knowledge that the learner need to have, or the breadth of knowledge at that level? And then they can say, okay, that is, and we will evaluate according to that also. Associated assessment criteria is that how will they assess the learner really achieved the outcome? Then integrated assessments, what they look at, formative and summative assessment, formative during learning, for learning, summative assessment after learning, and then after learning itself. And you can see there also international comparability. Yes, we do that. The institutions or the qualification developers must indicate how does this qualification compare with international qualifications. And we also said to people, remember that international is not only Europe or US or Australia, it's also at the borders of South Africa. Slower. Thank you. Sorry. I'm getting excited and I keep on talking faster and faster. So I apologize for the translators. Okay, international comparability is what we keep on saying is that you can look also at other countries outside South Africa. For example, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Egypt, for example. So that is the international comparability. Articulation, what we do is that we say that there should be articulation for a learning pathway, and that is from level 5 up to level 10, or a progression or a work pathway. So that can be that, if, for example, I studied to be an electrician again, I will not only be an electrician, I may be a supervisor or a manager. So there may be articulation to those kind of qualifications also. And then, yeah, that is the last part of the qualification. When we do evaluate qualifications for registration on the NQF, and when you look at the NQF, for qualifications on the NQF, you can see all their headings on the qualification document. I spoke about the level descriptors. Nadia mentioned level 1 to level 10, and each quality council for each level. But what we also need to do, and we need to remember, is that it is not a development by SAQA. We need to do it in consultation with the QCs or the quality councils. So when we develop any policy, we need to make sure that we consult with the quality council so that they can also get their inputs and to take the context of that specific sub-framework into consideration. Then also, if you look at the qualification, is that what we mean by authentic, it is accredited, or the qualification or the provider or the program is accredited. The qualification is registered on the NQF. And if you read the the NQF Act, that all South African qualifications must be registered on the NQF. And then authentic is that the learner really achieved the qualification, or did he buy the qualification, or maybe in a lucky packet or something like that. Also, we included the professional bodies, and it started actually in 2001 up to about 2005, looking at professional qualifications. What is the purpose? Should we include professional qualifications on the NQF? And then, as Nadia indicated, in 2006, 7, 8, there was consultation, and they changed to say that don't look only at professional qualifications, but how can professional bodies also contribute to the whole development and lifelong learning of a learner? So when you look at the NQF Act, again, there are 4 sections dealing with that. A professional body is defined as a body of expert practitioners in a specific occupational field. And what we keep on saying is that if you look at recognition of a professional body, is that it cannot be anybody saying that, yeah, I want to be a professional body. They need to have the back or support of the occupational field also. So we do have a process also in looking at professional bodies or applications of professional bodies before we recognize them. So the first one is that they need to apply to SAQA for recognition. And as I indicate, we do have a policy looking at on the recognition of that. The second one is that they need to apply to register a professional designation. And Nadia indicated that designation is recognition of a person's knowledge and expertise in a specific occupational field to practice or just to get the recognition of what he or she achieved. Then one important area is that they need to be involved in the development of qualifications as well as in quality assurance. It's not that they will do on their own quality assurance. It must be in consultation with the quality council. If we look at the professional designation, that each professional designation must have an underlying qualification. And that's why they are involved in the development of qualifications. Nadia also spoke about statutory and non-statutory bodies. What we indicate, it is established by an act, and anybody who would like to practice in that specific occupation must be registered with a professional body, and they must get the professional designation. The biggest contestation at this stage, non-statutory bodies. What we indicate is that they are not established by act. It is a body of expert practitioners in that specific occupational field and supported by everybody working in that. But membership to that body is voluntary. So that's the biggest challenge for non-statutory bodies, that how can I be financially viable if it's a voluntary membership, because they base their sustainability on the membership fees. But currently what we also do is that we do have one set of professional body or a policy and criteria for professional bodies. And Nadia indicated in the pipeline is that we do look at that to say, how can we differentiate? Purpose also for including professional bodies, as indicated, is that if you are designated, you need to attend continuous professional development. And that is also recorded then, making sure that Nadia mentioned about the small units of learning. How can we record that and give recognition to that also? This is a difference between a qualification and a designation. And you can see a qualification awarded by an educational institution, where a designation by the professional body. A qualification, once achieved, is achieved. You cannot take it away. But a designation can be revoked. So if a person, in order to keep your designation, is that you need to attend CPD, you need to subscribe to a code of ethics, and you need to pay up your fees. So if any of those are not there, they can take a designation away. You don't need to maintain your qualification. Although you're learning as a person, you'll still go out and you will still learn. But as I indicate there, is that to maintain your designation, is that these are the three things that you need to do. Qualifications, academic discipline is the focus, to say that what are the academic things that I need to do. Engineer the profession is that if I work, for example, as a secretary, what should I do? Or as a director, because there's an Institute of Directors, what should I do? What should I focus on? What competence do I need to develop to keep my designation also? So qualification owned by the individual is my qualification, and the designation owned by the profession. So if you look at the NQF MIS, that you under professional bodies, you can see that they register their designations with a code also. Your qualification does not necessarily lead to a designation or a profession, where your qualification, as I indicated, is the underlying requirement for the designation. And then the biggest is that a qualification is at a specific NQF level, where your designation is not. Although it's registered, it's not linked to a level. And that is something that people really need to understand when they apply also for designations. This is my last part, and Tola will come up here. As I indicate, is that we speak about lifelong learning. I mentioned that the professional bodies need to be recognized by SAQA, and they need to register the professional designation. There you can see it's a definition of a professional designation, a title or status conferred by the professional body in recognition of expertise or right to practice. And that is where the biggest debate started between statutory bodies and non-statutory bodies, is that the statutory bodies provide you the right to practice, where belonging to a non-statutory body should not actually give you the right to practice, but they recognize your expertise. And then you can see that we start normally is that if you want to go through a professional route, your normal schooling, you get an underlying qualification, and then you need to have some practical experience to build competence after you get your qualification. then you can get your designation. But you can also get your designation through RPL. To say that if you don't have the underlying qualification, but you've got years of experience, then you can also get your designation. And then to obtain or to retain your designation, you need to have continuous professional development. Colleagues, thank you very much.
Thank you, Yapi. We do love your excitement in the work that you do. Yapi, we joke and say you eat, drink, and you sleep registration of qualifications. So thank you so much for that. Colleagues, it is so true, and it resonates with what we've been talking all through the last few days on NQF being a contested landscape, the issue of policies, terminologies. So Yapi has talked about it, and at least in SACWA, we had, and Colleen, you would remember the NQFpedia, which is being updated to a large extent, and it is an interesting and important area of work, because you're dealing with terminologies, and sometimes they can be very confusing, and it may mean different things in different contexts. So that has been a very helpful area for us, and something that we can share. I know it's being further developed over the next few months, and also processes. I'd like to now call Tola, Omatola, but we lovingly call her Tola, to take us through, and as we are going further into it, take us through the whole area of MIS. Tola?
Thanks, Naveen. Hello, colleagues. How are you? How's everyone? My name is Tola, and today I think I've got the easiest work of the lot. I will just talk you through the National Qualifications Framework Management Information System, which we lovingly call the NQF MIS. I have had a very interesting, one second. Could you please help me move my slides? Is it a double? Yes. I think that's better. Thank you. Yes. When it comes to the NQF MIS, the Management Information System, it is the information system that manages every aspect of the South African National Qualifications Framework. So everything that Yapi said around qualifications, everything that Nadia has touched on, everything that can be captured as information is then regulated by this NQF MIS. The NQF Act of 2008, which Nadia covered thoroughly, mandates SACWA to maintain what we call a National Learners Records Database. Now, this National Learners Records Database is a subset, if I can put it, of information systems. It is the main information system of the NQF, but there are other information systems, and we'll go through them. But this NLRD is a main one. And what the NLRD comprises of is different registers. The NLRD is a relational database. What I mean by that is it has multiple registers or different registers, each containing different information, but they're all interrelated and they all work together. So the first register is a register of national qualifications and part qualifications. Now, I know that that's the title of my presentation, but of course, I'm happy to touch on all the other registers to see how they all link together. There's also the register of learner achievements, which looks at every learning achievement by learners who have gone through the through the South African education and training system. There is a provider register, which contains details of the institution that has awarded the qualification or part qualification. And as Yapi has covered, we've also got a register of professional bodies, recognized professional bodies, the designations that these professional bodies offer as well as the number of designates that are part of these professional bodies. One more register that we have is not one more, but different other registers that cover everything that relates to the registration of qualifications, the verification of qualifications, and accreditation. So multiple registers, but the first four are the most important ones. Nadia mentioned that we have an amended act that has not been promulgated or signed off by the president. When it is signed off, we will have 2 additional registers to add to this big sphere. The first will be a register of misrepresented qualifications, and the second will be a register of fraudulent qualifications that we can keep track of. Now, the same act that then, empowers this also then mandates the 3 different quality councils that have been touched by my colleagues. This law mandates them to each maintain a database of learning achievements, and these learning achievements must be submitted to the NLRD through SAQA at a frequent basis, and submitted to them so that there is one holistic database or one holistic information system that has an entire learner's details on there. All right. Everything I've said, I have just covered on this slide, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the other databases that form up this ecosystem of information systems. We've got the verifications database, and you'll see that at the top right-hand corner over there, that little diagram shows every other kind of database that we've got. In the middle, we've got the NLRD that I've just taken you through. We've got the verifications database, which is a collection of information of verified information. So learners or individuals that are coming into South Africa to learn, to study, or to work and want their qualifications verified, we keep that information and the outcome of their verifications process on this verifications database. We've got those 2 that have not yet come into effect. And of course, we've got the foreign qualifications database, which looks at the process of evaluation, the outcome of the evaluation process of foreign of learners who have come in with a qualification that needs to be evaluated against the South African qualification. I hope I'm still going okay. Okay. All right. The NLRD was developed in 1999. It is we call it the jewel of the South African National Framework, because on it is where you can find an entire life story, in theory, the entire life story of a learner's journey through the system. So if you look me up on the NLRD, you should be able to see all my learning achievements that I have achieved within the country. It was developed in 1999. It is widely considered to be the most comprehensive register of learner achievements on the continent. And we say that proudly because, when we started with this, it was such a big step. Now, in the other, perhaps, departments of education, they have their own individual databases, but the NLRD has a compilation of everything, and that's what makes it so beautiful. I will take you through the information. What do we use this information for? So it's great that we've been told you can take care of this, get information on learners, get information on the qualifications and the qualifications that these learners learn. But what else can it be used for? The information is used to, first and foremost, to provide progress that has been made towards implementing the NQF. And secondly, it provides information at a macro policy level. So it provides very insightful information and reports to policymakers and helps inform research and answer research-related questions. There are various reporting capabilities about it, where you want to learn about a learner, or you want to learn more about a qualification, know what the providers are, etc. what are the data sources, for this NQF MIS or the NLRD in particular? I think Yapi's already covered a big part of it, and his unit is responsible for providing the information on the national qualifications and path qualifications. So if you remember on his presentation where he shared the different components of what a qualification would require to be registered on the NQF, all of that information goes first into the NLRD. So if I pull up a qualification, I must be able to see everything about that qualification, the international, what it's been internationally benchmarked against, what the recognition of prior learning, what other qualifications, can come through from there, the title, the NQF level, the number of credits, and. Then we've got the data from the 3 quality councils. Each of the quality councils and their providers submit information. So we've got data from the quality council that manages the basic education, the general and further education and training qualification sub-framework. We've got data from the occupational qualification sub-framework. And then the higher education sub-framework is split into 2. We've got data from the public, there are about 26 public higher education institutions in the country, and about 90 registered private higher education institutions in the country. And of course, professional bodies, like my colleagues have mentioned. All of this data will then encompass things like learners and their achievements, providers, misrepresented qualifications, and other associated information. So you can see it's quite a comprehensive information system. I just want to maybe talk a little about the content of the registers. I'll start with the qualifications register. This qualifications register currently, as at the 30th of June 2022, there are 9,573 qualifications that have been registered on the NQF. Information about these qualifications or associated information includes, the ID and the title, the NQF level, the rationale and purpose, which sub-framework does that qualification or is that qualification registered to, the articulation options, what date was it registered, etc. And there are just about 20 more related fields that talk just about that qualification. Then we've got unit standards, which is a part of a qualification, and Nadia already touched on this as well. Again, we have information about 14,000 unit standards. And the information on the unit standards also reflect what we have on the qualifications, which is your title, at what level is it, what's the purpose of it, what are the learning assumptions, which providers then, provide these unit standards. Another register is the providers register. Here you'll have information about what's the provider name, what are their details, email addresses, what type of providers are they? Are they public institutions or private, etc. We've got the designation information, and we currently have 102 professional bodies that are related to 375 professional designations, and in total, recognized professional bodies have about 1,200,000 professionally designated members, and these are each registers that contain additional information. Then we've got the Register of Learning Achievements, which is quite a big one. We've got about 19 million registered achievements registered on the NQF, and about 40,000 of these achievements have been achieved through the recognition of prior learning. And then most importantly, I think, then we have information about the people that have achieved these qualifications, that have attained this professional designations or are affiliated to these professional bodies. And on the NLRD, there are about 21 million people that we can at any point pull up information on them about what they've studied, who are they male or female, what population group they are, what's their date of birth, what are their identities, what have they studied. So each of these are interrelated then. So far, so good. Good. What do we use the information on the NLRD for? Well, I covered that initially, but I thought, just to give a bit of a perspective, we'd like to look at trends. When we look at trends in qualification achievements, and this is an example of what we do, we just look at trends over the years. We can then, disaggregate this information either by sub-framework or by qualification to see how well we are progressing on matters of the NQF. Another kind of analysis that we use the information on the NQF MIS for is then looking at learning pathways and how learners have progressed through the different levels of the national qualifications framework. So an example of this, and it's a very complicated chart, but it's just looking at how learners either go upwards within levels, across levels, or across sub-frameworks of the NQF of the National Qualifications Framework. Okay. I'd like to touch a little bit about some of the highlights and then some of our challenges as we manage this NQF MIS and some of the stories that have come out from there. One of the highlights is that we are able to track learners who have achieved qualifications via the recognition of learning, recognition of prior learning and articulation. So it has helped from the time that we started looking at RPL holistically in South Africa. We can track how many learners and what that progression has been within the RPL space. How articulation is progressing in the country, it's easy to track that because we have that information and we have those numbers. We worked with 3 sectors in the country to sort of develop learning pathways for their learners and see how, these sectors can either grow or can move from where they are beyond. So those 3 sectors, we have looked at early childhood development, community development, and engineering. And what we did was we went to the bodies that were responsible for each of these sectors and say, what are learners that have studied within the sector, how are they supposed to navigate the NQF? And what it is that we see on the NQF MIS related to those learners. And an example of this is this, this little chart up here. So when we spoke to the experts regarding early childhood development, we said, when you plot your pathways, I, as a learner, if I'm supposed to study something that has to do with early childhood development, how do I navigate the NQF? Or how have you, visualized the qualifications such that navigating the NQF looks like this? And they came up with this chart such that if you have a National Senior Certificate at NQF Level 4, for instance, you can move up into the higher education qualification sub-framework. You can move across into the OQSF. We said, this is fantastic. So each of these arrows sort of looks at how a learner has progressed from one NQF level to the other in the eyes of those who have developed these qualifications and who have an outcome for these qualifications. When we look on the NLRD, what we see is a different picture. So we see that, and you can compare some of the numbers, is while you have upward movement in most cases, while you should have upward movement in most cases, you have all sorts of movements here. So that's an example of what we do. And this kind of information we will take back to that sector, who will then look at how, what are the blockages that allows learners move around like this instead of this, as a good example. I think that's all from that chart. Another thing that we use the information on the NQF information system for is then for international benchmarking. We have worked with the South African Development Community countries within the SADC region to come up with a mobility a report that looks at how learners within that region have been moving within other countries in the region. We do this. We work with the countries, the SADC countries, 16 of them, including South Africa. The information from South Africa comes from the NLRD, and we look at how these learners are moving into the different countries and the different spaces. And this helps to, it helps with understanding learner movement within the region and within the continent as a whole. All right. Other highlights is, as I've mentioned, the NQF MIS then is used for national policy making and analysis. It helps us track learners through the system. And I think most importantly, SAQA has assisted countries in conceptualizing similar systems. And a recent example of that has been our work with Namibia, where we have tried to replicate some of the aspects of this NQF MIS that Namibia has found very interesting. No system is without its challenges. And even though we have had this beautiful treasure for the last 20 years plus, there have been challenges. One of the biggest challenges, and that was hinted at earlier, is the historical data gaps that we have on the system. So learners who have studied or achieved a qualification before a particular time, say 1994, most of their achievement records still exist on paper, and they have not been captured electronically into any of the systems. And so part of what we are looking at as a unit and as SAQA is to come up with digitization initiatives. I know digitization has been mentioned quite a couple of times today, but digitization initiatives where we can, I think Cape Verde covered that very well this morning, to ensure that paper records are then translated into electronic records so that a learner is not disadvantaged, if I can put it that way. Then another challenge that we faced is data submission. The providers that are supposed to submit this information according to the Act at often set times do not always do this, and this results in delays. So our verifications processes are impacted by this. One way that we're looking at addressing that, and you'll see through the slides, is we've tried to come up with ways to address each of the challenges. One way that we're looking to address that is to gazette the data regulations and the data submission so that it is written into law, it is legislated properly, and we've made good progress with that. A third challenge is data quality and integrity. Our information, sometimes the nature of information is it's inaccurate and there are errors with submissions. One way we try to address that is to consistently and constantly come up with data cleaning exercises at a massive scale. When you look at millions of records, to try to clean up those records at predetermined times. There are other registers that exist in our NQF universe, but are not fully integrated into this MIS. Currently, SAQA is looking at a project that will then bring some of these registers together, and we're constantly looking for opportunities to integrate them all. These are some of the challenges that we face. In my last slide, I will talk about lessons learned. What have we learned so far? First, information is vital. And when we are developing our NQFs and frameworks, it's also important to, by the side, understand that information is gold, because that's what's going to enable you see the past and the present and help you to plan for the future. No data is ever too small. No data is ever too vague. It's all important information that comes together to build your NQFs as you go on. The development of information systems within the NQF context is usually a multi-year process, and it's informed by continuous improvement. And thirdly, one thing that we have learned is that for 20 years, we have nailed the art of getting information into the system. Now it's time to look beyond that and make the best use of that information that we have to grow, improve the NQF, and make it more strategic. I think that's my presentation. Thank you.